Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm here to talk about a new exhibition at the Science Museum in London called Mines, Metals and Machines, the Raw Materials of Revolution. It is an exhibition that looks at the three key elements or ingredients of the Industrial Revolution. But we will also be looking at the social history of this period and how people lived, how they interacted with their workplaces, and how they were treated in those workplaces. Those are, of course, mines, metals, and machines. And this exhibition looks at them through the lens of two places, Manchester and Birmingham. So, it was possible to work these mines in a way that was not possible elsewhere in Britain. Secondly, however, there was an increasing demand for energy. So, there was a ready supply of this mineral available to fuel the new machines that were being developed at this period. We have some wonderful portraits by the painter William Freud, who specialized in painting scenes of everyday life. For many miners, their lot was a hard one. Conditions in the mines were really difficult. There was lots of flooding. There was lots of dust. There was the ever-present danger of explosions and of being trapped or buried by falling rocks. Alongside this, however, is the fact that people worked very long hours. It looks at the processes by which raw materials are turned into something useful, and it focuses particularly on iron. Iron was really important during this period because it was strong, it was durable, and it could be made into different shapes. The furnace would be heated, and the iron would melt, and then it would be taken out, and it would be hammered and shaped into different forms. This process required huge amounts of energy, and it created huge amounts of waste. But it was the process that was used to create the iron that fueled the Industrial Revolution. It looks at the workshops and sheds where innovation took place. And in particular, it benefited from the invention of the spinning jenny, which was a machine that could spin many threads at once, and the power loom, which was a machine that could weave those threads into cloth. These machines transformed the way in which textiles were made. It has object loans from both universities and from a range of other museums and private collections. I hope you get a chance to see it. Thank you very much. They made them cheaper, they made them more efficient, and they made them stronger. And it focuses particularly on the cotton industry. And it also includes a display on the power loom, which is a machine that weaves the cotton into cloth. These machines were powered by water initially, and then later on, they were powered by steam. And they were essential to the process of transforming cotton into cloth. It could be made into tools. It could be made into bridges. It could be made into railways. And inventors who were responsible for creating some of the first machines that were powered by coal and water. In particular, we look at the workshops of James Watt, who was the engineer who improved the steam engine, and Matthew Murray, who was the engineer who built the first locomotive to travel on rails. These men and their workshops are the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. It was through their ideas, their inventions, and their innovations that the machines were created that drove the changes that swept Britain, and then the world during the Industrial Revolution. And therefore, it became an incredibly important material during this period. People were expected to work from before sunrise until after sunset. And you need coal to fuel the furnaces in which that iron ore would be processed. This part of the exhibition looks at the process by which iron was made in the famous iron furnaces of Birmingham. This is known as puddling, and it is demonstrated in a film and shown through models and reconstructed furnaces. They worked 6 days a week, and often they would work for very little money. And in particular, he painted the lives of miners and their families. We have a large display on the steam engine, and we have some wonderful models of some of the machines that were powered by the steam engine. These include a weaving loom, a spinning jenny, a rolling mill, and even a model of a railway locomotive. All of these machines were powered by steam, and they were able to do tasks faster, cheaper, and more efficiently than ever before. And they were essential to the process of the Industrial Revolution. They would have sat in these cages, hundreds of them packed into a cageway, and they would have been lowered down into the dark depths of the earth. Once the coal had been brought up from the mine, it then had to be processed. It had to be washed. It had to be taken away from any of the impurities that had come up with it. And this was done by women and children. They would sort through the coal, picking out the impurities, breaking it up, and preparing it for use. Again, this was really hard work, and it was very dirty work, but it was essential to the process of turning raw materials into a usable resource. Once down there, they would have been responsible for hauling the coal up to the surface. This was really dangerous work. Accidents happened all the time. Sometimes the cageways would fall, and the children would be killed. These portraits really give us an insight into how people lived, how they interacted with each other, and what their homes might have looked like. And this is because the population had been growing steadily since the beginning of the 18th century. So, there were more people living in towns, cities, and the countryside. They needed more energy to power their homes. They needed more energy to fuel their industries. And this meant that coal became increasingly important as a source of energy. Coal mining was particularly important in this period. Of course, other minerals like iron ore and tin were incredibly important as well. But the burning question, pun intended, is why coal? Why was it that this particular mineral became so important? Rivers were being used as conduits to transport goods to different parts of the country, but also people were building dams across those rivers to power their mills. This meant that water power was becoming less available and less reliable, and therefore, coal provided a really useful alternative to power the steam engines that drove the Industrial Revolution. So it's very much a regional story which speaks to a national and international audience. And so, we'll be looking at mining, metals and machines, and the ways in which people worked, and the working conditions under which they toiled. The first part of the exhibition looks at mines, so the sources of the raw materials that drove this period of revolutionary change. And it focuses particularly on coal. So, there are several reasons for this. Firstly, the seams of coal were particularly accessible in this region. Thirdly, however, is the fact that water power, so the power of flowing water from rivers and streams, was becoming less reliable because of the deforestation of the countryside. Finally, however, is the fact that coal was relatively cheap. We then move on to look at the social history of coal mining in this period. We have a model of a colliery village. Alongside this, we have a reconstruction of a miner's cottage, which really gives us an insight into the scale of the rooms and how people might have lived within those four walls. One of the most striking objects in this part of the exhibition is the cageway, which is a way in which small children would have been lowered down into the mines. Finally, in this part of the exhibition, we look at the women and children who worked in the processing works. Part 2 of the exhibition looks at metals. In order to make iron, you need two things. You need the metal itself, so the iron ore. During this process, the iron ore would be mixed with limestone and coke, which is a form of coal, and it would be placed into a furnace. Finally, in this part of the exhibition, we look at the machines that were powered by the metals that were produced through this process. Part 3 of the exhibition looks at the machines themselves, the engines and mechanisms that were invented and refined during this period. The cotton industry was one of the first industries to benefit from the new machines that were being invented at this period. This part of the exhibition includes a large display on the cotton gin, which is a machine that separates the seeds from the cotton fibers. Finally, in this part of the exhibition, we look at the people who were behind these inventions, the engineers. This exhibition has been made in collaboration with the University of Manchester and the University of Birmingham.